Hi, everybody. Miles from Peak Performers here. I'm a disability inclusion partner here at Peak Performers, and thank you so much for joining our weekly segment, Disability Weekly. We've got a great program for you today where we're going to be talking about overcoming the fear of disability at work. And this is such an apropos topic. I was just taking a second to look through some of the different comments that were listed before. Yolanda chimed in to say, this is such an important point, Miles. Most of the fear around disability at work isn't about people, it's about uncertainty, inconsistency, and the absence of clear governance. When organizations don't have a structured way to understand needs, make decisions, and communicate adjustments, fear fills the gap. I think that was such a great call out. And thank you, Yolanda, for leaving that comment on there. And we have a great person to be able to talk today a little bit about all the different sources of fear and, most importantly, what we can do to help overcome the fear that exists within the workplace. Because right now, job seekers are afraid to disclose a disability, let alone ask for an interview accommodation. We have so many employees that are afraid to come out to their employer for additional support. And finally, we have many employers that are afraid of their very own employees that are living and working in their midst. After all, 26% of Americans have a disability, chronic health condition, or neurodiversity of some way, shape, or form, and they're afraid of this workforce that already is existing among their ranks. So let's break that down. As a quick shout out too, I want to always try to give a little bit of a value add to the people that are coming on. And if you want to learn more about the topic, a great resource that I would recommend is called Demystifying Disability by Emily Ladau. This is a great place for you to start your journey in understanding a little bit more about the disability lived experience from multiple different angles. And Emily has been very active within the disability advocacy community for many years. I hope one day that I can get her on for a Disability Weekly segment to plug some of the different things that she's working on as well. But without any further ado, I want to welcome Felicia Nurmsen. Felicia, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Miles, thank you for having me.
Well, it's good to have you. And before we dive into the topic at hand, could you give me like a quick 30-second bio of who you are?
Sure, thanks so much. So Felicia Nurmsen, a CEO and founder of Inclusion Without Illusion, previously the chief content and resource officer at NOD for 8 years. Have been doing this work for, close to 25 years now, so I'll date myself. And really focusing now more on things that are not only good for business, but are also good for employees with disabilities. Because when companies focus on employees, they see higher productivity, they see higher engagement, culture change. But when they simply focus on systems, not so much. So I really am so excited to be able to focus on that more than I ever have.
Well, it's so good to have you. And I'm excited about all the new direction that you're doing and how you're working with companies to help them get over this fear and talk about disability as a human element, right? This is a human factor, not an other different group of people. This is our people. This is the workforce. People with disabilities are everywhere and all around us. Before we get dived into it as well, I want to give a shout out to anybody that is joining us live. Please take a second to introduce yourself into the chat. We'll try to address some of the questions that are coming up. Please also do connect with each other. This is a great opportunity to meet like-minded individuals that are uniquely interested in disability, inclusion, accessibility, accommodations, all that good stuff. So please take a second to introduce yourself in the chat, and please chime in with some questions as you have them during the course of today's conversation. So Felicia, what is everybody so afraid of?
Oh my goodness, that's such a loaded question, because there are so many different things, as you move through life and as you understand it, being a person with a disability, you get to see it through that disability lens yourself. I know, I have non-apparent disabilities. You would never know if I didn't tell you, right? I have a hearing impairment. I use hearing aids. I live with ADD. That's why I don't have the chat open right now, because if I do, I'm going to be reading the questions. And I also have depression and anxiety. So all of these things, all of that being said, I didn't disclose my disabilities. Really, ever. Throughout my entire career, I did not disclose my disabilities. I could not see anything good ever coming of it. As I moved up, and especially as I moved into leadership roles, I was nervous about it. Being a young woman, being someone with a disability, someone that I did need some accommodations, and just didn't ask for them. I
Hmm.
did the workaround, right? Then, you get in your car and you leave work and you just think, it's natural to cry in your car at work from, leaving work
Hmm.
because you have spent the whole day either masking or thinking about how if you only could ask for XYZ, how that would really be so helpful. So seeing it through that lens, but then also working with so many different companies across so many different industries over the years, Miles, it just, it's it's not I hate to use the words concerning, all of those words that we tend to use, but one of the things I think is that it's eye-opening of
Hmm.
just how many companies really do not have a concrete, easy to define system,
Hmm.
right? From high, like attraction, it's not even higher, from attracting people with disabilities all the way through the employee life cycle, right? No
Yeah.
one's thinking about that, right? They think about, okay, I'm going to hire someone and this is great. And they're going to sit and they're going to do their job. And, oh, hooray, right? This is great. I've hired somebody with a disability without really ever thinking about, okay, so now what does that mean?
Hmm.
Right? What's next? And are my existing employees prepared? Right?
Mhm.
Do they understand what it means to have a disability? Do they understand that you are a non-disabled peer to this person, right? We're
Yeah.
equal. Just because that person has a disability does not mean that they are less than. So it's a combination of, as I said, it's systemic, we can change systems and we can educate individuals, but they have to be done at the same time.
Hmm.
Or how are we ever going to really alleviate that stigma,
Yeah.
particularly around mental health? I mean, that's why I never disclosed mine, right? All I could think of was, well, how am I going to get promoted if they're thinking, well, and I'm just going to say it, she's a crazy woman.
Hmm. Yeah.
you know, those are the thoughts that go through your mind when you're thinking about how to navigate the workplace and what it means to be this person with a disability in a leadership role. You know what you should be doing, right? You
Yeah.
absolutely know that you should be talking about it, but there's always that fear in the back of your mind.
Well, there's always that fear. And I think that whenever there is any kernel of doubt, our default is to say no. Our default is to shut it down. And I think that that's the kernel of doubt, like, is what's holding so many people back. And to elaborate on your point, I work with job seekers, I work with businesses, I work with community partners, and I see all different levels of this fear manifest. And continually, at least once a week, I get into some kind of debate with people about whether disability itself is a bad word and whether we can even say that in a professional setting and stuff. For the record, in my professional opinion, I think you can. I think that there are definitely ways that you can say it in such a way that is polite to people. And I think it's also important to mirror the language that people prefer to use when referring to themselves. As long as you do that, I think that if you can refer to people as people with disabilities, you can refer to you should ask. Like, I personally prefer people with disabilities when referring to myself. I don't prefer disabled because I feel like, to me, that always kind of strikes like a car disabled on the side of the road, right? Like, so I just don't prefer that. But I also like people with disabilities because it puts the person first, and I think that that's how I've always chosen to identify. But everybody is different. The biggest thing is that don't let that kernel of fear of saying the wrong thing hold you back from saying nothing at all, because that's where people really get in trouble, is when you say nothing,
Yep.
you walk around on eggshells around people. That is felt. And so, above all else, you may say the wrong thing, you may do the wrong thing, but ultimately, you have to realize that people with disabilities are people first. They're humans, and they're used to navigating this. And I think as long as you don't say things with malicious intent to
Yep.
them, most people are going to forgive you and you're going to be able to move on. And just remember those mistakes. You may have been taught different words to describe people growing up, and the language may have changed now. Be reflective of that, understand that, and also acknowledge that too, that people, that language changes over time. But kind of getting back to the point of talking about this fear, we have job seekers, They are terrified to disclose their disability. And I see many people go into a situation where they have an observable disability, and they go to the interview and they say nothing about it. And a lot of times, what I feel like happens is that the unconscious bias takes over on behalf of the interviewers, and all of a sudden you are having to deal with an elephant in the room. And so sometimes I will advise job seekers, like, hey, if your disability is observable, maybe it's worthwhile getting ahead of that and talking about that, so that people aren't left with that question, with that kernel of doubt, with that wonder. It's not fair. It's not a fair expectation to you. Let me be crystal clear on that, but it still is helpful and strategic for you in many ways.
Yeah.
And then we get to employees, right? Like, we get to so many different employees like you that are afraid that it will hold them back. They're afraid that they will be treated differently, and they feel like they're the only ones that are experiencing this. And yet, if we talked about it, then all of a sudden we'd realize that we have more in common than we realize, and we also would be able to find more support groups that are out there and available. Sometimes this can be formalized like an ERG, and sometimes it's just having a network of other people that you trust. And then finally, to the businesses out there, I know that our headlines are dominated by this lawsuit here, this lawsuit there. And I know that your primary objective is to make money and grow. What I would tell you is that people with disabilities are an integral part to your workforce. And if you continue to dance around it and act in a non-inclusive way, and if you act with fear, I think that exposes you to more liability. Am I wrong here, Felicia?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I just, I put this out. My favorite lawsuit was, the Sherm lawsuit. I could not help myself because, the largest HR organization teaching, educating people, on, disability. They have like a certified disability specialist training, which is great. It's excellent because I know who did the training, for Sherm. And it's fantastic information, but they may have wanted to have their own people take it. And, so there is that general fear, but that's how to avoid those type of lawsuits, right? Is that if you have a training that's available to you, you should be taking that training. You should be using it as professional development for your own people, because it really is professional development. It's not about some kind of a specialty skill, right? Oh, this is special for special people. It is about professional development and understanding how to interact with people in different situations. It doesn't just have to be a person with a disability. There are many of us, right, that have, multiple marginalized identities that we bring to work every single day that may create some type of a challenge for someone that doesn't walk in our shoes.
Yeah.
So when you can go through that type of education process and professional development process, it really does help you to be better at work, and also creates an opportunity for you to continue to grow within the workplace because you have mastered, hopefully, this process of really understanding, how do you interact with different people? How do you support different people? And really, how do we bring different people up with us? Right? Not giving a hand out, but really giving a hand up, right? You can come along with me as I grow. I have seen that you have the skills, you have you have everything that we would be looking for as far as someone that's high potential, and then I am going to go to one report, the Deloitte report from 2024. It's a global disability report, and it was like 88% of employees disclosed their disability at work. It was like they interviewed 10,000 people, so it's not a small study.
Really?
But only 25% requested accommodations. And of that 25% that requested accommodations, 77% said were refused on the first try.
Yeah.
So again, what does that say to us? As a person with a disability, I have been hired, but now I'm not going to be given, or I hate that term, but I'm not going to be supported because you're not giving me anything. I'm not going to be supported right, in the way that I need to be supported in order to be successful in my role.
Yeah.
Again, this isn't special treatment.
Yeah.
This is to bring us to the same level.
Yeah.
not to create any kind of advantage. So that's where it breaks down, is that it's not really a disclosure problem, right? It's a trust issue. We don't have the trust that we need to have in order to continue with that accommodation process. That's a problem.
I agree. I also think that there's an education piece of it too that's missing. Like the people that are in the room, by the way, shout out to David Radcliffe, to Joel, to Karen Boxer, to Michael, and to Joel. Thank you all for joining us on live, and appreciate your comments and questions. I'll try to get to a couple of them sprinkled in here and there. But I think that what happens sometimes is that we are in our own little bubble. Where we are talking about disability, we're talking about neurodiversity, we're talking about concepts like ableism, but everybody outside our bubble has absolutely no idea what that means. And to them, most of the time when they hear disability, they imagine somebody in a wheelchair. So now we have fear coupled with a misunderstanding about what it means. And I have this conversation every day where I talk about my own disability experience. By the way, hearing impaired, nice to meet you, right? But I talk about my own disability lived experience, and I give examples of things that are covered under the ADA. And they say, I had no idea that applied to me. And I think that that's so valid that many people, we estimate that 26% of all Americans have a disability, and that's according to the CDC. That number is likely higher, in my opinion. I think that by the time you count all the people that fall under the umbrella of neurodiversity, everybody with a chronic health issue, everybody that has some kind of disabling element to them, you talking about an awful darn lot of people. And this would be my call out to the leaders out there, the people that have already attained power. Like you said, Felicia, take a moment to go out on a limb and to share your own experience, because the more that you can do to share your own personal lived experience with disability, and how you've been successful with your disability, not in spite of it, successful with your disability, you now open up so many individuals to being able to come forward to talk about their disability. But I want to dig into the other thing that you mentioned from that Deloitte study of so many people getting denied an accommodation. What's up with that? Like, why is that happening so much?
Right. If you think about who's handling accommodations much of the time, again, I'm going to go back to education, because we do have managers, right? Who are you going to go to if you need an accommodation? You're going to go to your manager or supervisor first. They are the people that you know. If they don't have any idea what an accommodation is, or what you're asking for, or even how to identify that you're asking for an adjustment, then that becomes the zero, right? You really don't have a lot of opportunity there. They may say, oh, okay, don't worry, whatever, just brush it off. And I have seen that. I've had a situation where, there was a person that requested, an accommodation. The HR person, came to me. I was already working with the organization. And they talked about how they really didn't think that they would be able to do it. And once you start to talk about it and just continue to ask why, right? Why wouldn't you be able to do it? Then the light bulbs start to go off. Like, well, there really is no reason that we couldn't do it. A lot of them cite expense. And that goes to, I wish I had it in front of me, because I don't recall the size of the organizations that the employees were from.
Yeah.
So if it's small employers, you can understand that. If it's enterprise-wide employers, you don't have a leg to stand on. Yeah. When companies are, sure, I'll give Sherm as an example, right? You're going to deny this person an accommodation, and it's based on the easiest accommodation that you probably could make, and you expect that that's going to fly?
Yeah.
No, but a lot of people will just not. They're not going to pursue it. I didn't pursue mine, right? I'm not going to pursue it. I got an 8-page questionnaire when I asked for my first accommodation. Did I complete it? Absolutely not.
Well,
on principle alone.
You talk about this, and I think that there's really kind of two managers out there, right? Like there are hiring managers out there that get into, well, I should just say managers that get in there because they were hired specifically to do the job as manager. But then there's everybody else. There's people that were individual contributors that got promoted into the role and now find themselves managing people. And they oftentimes have zero knowledge about HR, zero knowledge about disability accommodations. So they are oftentimes Googling this as you're, talking to them, just go, oh, shoot, what do I do now? Like, how do I manage this kind of situation? So to those individuals that are in the latter group that have no experience, like, where do you recommend they start?
Jan.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Job
That is,
Accommodation Network, askjan.org.
yeah.
We used to, when I was at Manpower Group and we were bringing that program to scale across the organization, I did it, I don't know, I went to like 26 states, 27 states. And that was the first thing that I did in every office is I had them, because at that point, like the click to chat had just come out for Jan, and I had them put that on their desktop so that anytime they had a question, they could just go. And we went through everything. We did training, our own training, the content that I had developed. But really, that's one of the best places to start, because you understand they have a lot, not just about accommodations, but just disability in general, right? And when you see some of the accommodations for, we'll use, neurodiverse, right? For neurodiverse individuals or autism, it's a quiet place. It's, there are some things that are so easy that we can do that we do not think about. To your point, we're thinking about this person in a wheelchair. We're thinking about the most extreme case of a person with a disability. We're not thinking about you and I, right? We're people within, that's the question that you would get, well, what can people, what can they do? What can those people do?
Oh, I hate that question. My least favorite question in the world is, what kind of jobs do you have for people with disabilities? And I say, you're asking the wrong question. You should be asking, what jobs do you have? Because people with disabilities are already doing it. But I think it does bring up a valid point. There is a lot of fear that people with disabilities are not going to be able to do the job. But I think that at the end of the day, if you ever have questions about it, realize that anybody that's applying for your job that has a disability, they are thinking about it. Like, they have thought about it a lot longer than you have about whether they're able to do this job or not. And they're thinking about the physical requirements of the job. They're also thinking about the social element of it. They're thinking about what they're expected to do on a day-to-day basis. And they're carefully evaluating that to make sure that they're going to be able to do, because none of us want to fail. None of us want to get into a position and immediately fail upon the role. So when it comes to it, trust people. Like, if they say they can do it, trust them. And I think the other thing that I hear a lot from employers is that, well, I'm afraid that people with disabilities are going to get hurt on the job.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. The protectionism. Absolutely.
It's there's one particular study I point you towards with Walgreens, where they did an integrated study with a number of different individuals that were working with disabilities and without disabilities in an integrated environment across multiple different distribution centers that looked at thousands of employees. And what they found, ironically, was that people with disabilities actually got hurt on the job less. And that was ultimately because, I speculate, because they were probably a little bit more aware of their body and their limitations, and they were careful not to overdo it, right? So
they're actually working safer within those environments.
It's kind of like when you're a young 20-year-old, right? You feel like you're invincible. You take all kinds of risks, and you hurt yourself much more likely than you are when you're middle-aged, and you're just kind of like, I better not twist that one thing because I know how much that is going to hurt, right? So we all handle these kind of things differently. But I want to back up to cost as well, because there are many employers that cite cost as a reason for being afraid to hire more people with disabilities. And for the record, the vast majority of accommodations are $0. In fact, 56%. There is a particular study that's on Jan's website, and of those that do have a cost that's attached to it, the average cost is $300. So when you think about the full scope of employment, Felicia, hiring people is expensive, right? Like, so we're talking small potatoes, right?
It is, absolutely. And when you look at the ROI of that, right? So you invest $500 or $600, right? I'm going to go up from the 300, invest $500 or $600 into an employee, that then you are increasing your retention rate. Because now you have, and it's not just for people with disabilities. Before I left NOD, we did a longitudinal study of the last 5 years of the Disability Employment Tracker. And Rutgers is the one that took all of the information, it's all, redacted, no names or anything, but found that when you are actually supporting people with disabilities, accommodations in the workplace, that you see a higher retention of not only people with disabilities, but overall across the board, you see a higher level of retention.
Mhm.
And that's important when you think about, what's the average, the average job, right? $65,000,
Yes.
right? And then you put training costs on top of that. I did and thank you, Miles, let me know. I did an accommodation calculator, and I put that out there so that people could see that really what it means and what's the ROI of your accommodations. Simply because we don't have a good understanding of that. We don't really understand that it's good for everyone.
Yeah.
Um, as is, most things, most innovations they're meant for people with disabilities, but I'll use Walgreens as an example, right? What they found is they did pictorials,
Mhm.
right, within their distribution centers. And it was, specifically, they had, requests. They were working with different organizations. So they did the pictorials, not only good for people with disabilities, everybody loved it, right? It was like, this is great. Like, why didn't we do this before? So I want to circle back to the fear piece of it,
Yeah.
and knowing that it is a lot about education. It is a lot about systemic discrimination.
Mhm.
Now that AI is coming into the game, we're talking
Mhm.
about AI governance, which nobody's doing. We're talking about, AI systems that, are going to, reduce bias. Well, that has yet to play out.
Yeah.
There are now all of these additional innovations that we have that could potentially um, continue to screen us out. And if we're not in the workplace, then there's no way that we're ever going to overcome the fear. There just isn't, because we're not seen enough. We don't interact enough with people. And just like myself, right? You don't talk about your own disability for fear of whatever that is, repercussions. And it's real. People have experienced this more times than not. And I know, I think you
So
said
where
Kim.
did the switch happen for you,
Yeah.
Felicia? Like, where did the switch come to where you were more comfortable talking about your own disability lived experience?
I wasn't comfortable, but I really felt like I needed to do it.
Yeah.
And I did it at NOD is when I
Okay.
really talked about my own personal experience, about why I never wanted to disclose. I have a grandmother that
Mhm.
had, significant mental health disabilities. She was institutionalized. And then she was one of those people that, had a lobotomy, right? It was at
Wow.
that
Okay.
time,
Yeah.
and that is really, I had a bias. I had my own bias, right? That, you don't talk about it, right?
Yeah.
We never, that was my father, it was my paternal grandmother, you don't talk about it. There's nothing good that will come of it. It's something to fear,
Yeah.
because everything that happened to her, being a widow, being alone, being Puerto Rican, right? Didn't speak English. She didn't have any, there were no advocates for her, right? There was no one looking out for her.
And
So
so
that's what
often
made it
this,
difficult for me.
yeah, this fear comes from a place from an internalized standpoint, right? Like we
It
talk
does.
about ableism, and for those who are unfamiliar with that term, that's basically the concept that there is a bias towards people without disabilities in one shape or manner, and it's the idea that the whole world is structured around quote able-bodied. I hate that term, but we're going to use it for convenience sake for right now. But the whole world is biased towards people that are quote able-bodied and able-minded. But I think that the first step to that and conquering the fear is looking inward and thinking about the biases that you yourself harbor. I hate to break it to you. You got biases. I got biases. We all
Everyone
got
does.
biases. We do. And it's important to look inward to think about that and how that is impacting your judgments and your interactions with individuals too. But I think that the other thing I wanted to ask about was oftentimes when we're interfacing with organizations, we can oftentimes, it sounds like Mr. Roboto, right? So you talk to compliance, you talk to the ADA team and stuff, and they're very specific about the language that they choose so that they don't get in legal hot water. So I feel I'm afraid of lawyers. Like personally, that's not due to running with the law, but just because I don't always understand what they're saying, and it makes me nervous that I will say the wrong thing. And I think many people have a similar kind of fear, especially when the language is structured in such a way. So How do we get over the fear and how do we bridge that communication gap of when people are talking in a very specific and formatted way compared with how we describe disability, neurodiversity, and stuff from a more colloquial manner?
That's a great question because it really is, it's programmed, right, if you
Yeah.
will, right? Because it is all about, you know, um, the people in those roles are about the organization, not about the individual.
Mm.
um, and that can be in HR. It's about the organization. It's not about the individual.
Mm.
So that can be that can be a real challenge for people. But I do think that if we can have those conversations, if we can come in, more from the human aspect, right?
Mhm.
We talked about how this is just part of the human condition in going through that process with federal contractors that have their strict compliance, requirements that they need to meet, and looking at it more from, you know, it's it's not about compliance, right? It should be compliance is the floor, not the ceiling. Right? We
Yeah,
should not just be focusing on compliance, although if that's your job, of course that's what you're going to do. But
sure.
trying to introduce some, I'll give this. When I again this was at NOD, we it was during the first Trump administration,
Mhm.
and we actually did the training for the staff at OFCCP that were doing the
Hmm.
focused reviews,
Okay, cool.
because Craig
Yeah.
Lean was there. He was the person that was, the head of OFCCP, and he felt that it was really important for his staff that would be responsible for that to understand not just the compliance piece of it, but how to interact, right?
Mm.
What does disability mean? So having more leaders like that understand that you're not just looking at it through the compliance lens, but you really do have to understand how to work with people so
Mm.
that you are looking at it from the individual perspective as well as overall through that compliance lens, because it's important, but it should not be the only factor that we use as far as being able to track success or failure, whether or not you're compliant.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I wanted to ask about is I want to pose a couple of hypotheticals and how you would navigate certain situations, because I think so much of this also comes down to an interpersonal fear. So let's start with an easy one, right? So you have a coworker who uses a wheelchair. Do you open the door for them?
I mean, that's a good question, right? You could ask, right?
That's a
Any
great way to put it, right?
assistance,
Like,
right?
can I open the door for you? I
Can I
mean,
open the
you
door
do
for
that
you?
for anybody else, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Let's say, for example, that you have a person who is deaf that works with you, and you're having an after hours kind of like happy hour mixer and stuff in a crowded or noisy environment where it's difficult for them to hear you. They can hear you in the office setting because, say, for example, they're deaf in one ear, but they can hear out of the other. But when they get into crowded situations like that, they can't. Do you invite them?
You absolutely invite them and allow them to make the decision themselves whether or not they're going to attend. However,
Yeah.
there's another piece of that, right?
Yeah.
Whoever's planning these these outings needs to understand that not everyone, and it's not just the person who's hard of hearing, it
Yeah.
is those of us that may have ADD, we may be on the spectrum, and whatever it is, have autism, that those types of environments are not good for everyone.
Yeah.
Right? There's so many different things that come into that too. The more we age, the less we want to be, in these scenarios where it's loud and, all of that. So there's like that piece of it that do you invite them? Yes, you do. Absolutely. You allow them to decide whether or not they want to come. But for the next time, you might want to look at and, you know, talk with that person. You know what? I see that you didn't come to the last event. What can we do that would make it
Mhm.
easier for you to attend? I don't want you to miss out.
I love that. Yeah, ask them directly. And speaking of asking them, you yourself have expressed how you were often afraid to talk about mental health at work too. But many times we might observe that a coworker is going through something, like they're very obviously struggling. So, at what point can and should we say something to somebody that obviously appears to be struggling? And is it our place?
That one's hard because I think that it's difficult for people to just ask, like, is everything okay?
Yeah.
without then moving into the counselor position,
Yeah.
right? Because it's not your role to be the counselor. What it
Mm.
is, though, is it is okay to say, you know what, I've kind of noticed, is everything okay? Is there anything that I can do to help or to support you? And, if they start to disclose to you, then that becomes a very private conversation.
Mm.
You cannot go and disclose for them, right? If they tell you what is happening, you can't go to your supervisor and
Yeah.
disclose for them.
Right.
It's actually against the law, right?
Yeah.
You can't do it, right? Because it's that person's, and that's how I felt about my own. It wasn't my story to tell. It's not your story to tell.
Yeah.
But you can have that conversation and then say, you know what, maybe you should look into, what are the resources that we have here? Like, is that,
Yeah.
have you looked at the EAP? Have you talked to, HR? Have you whatever? But do not move into the counselor role. It's not your role. If you
Yeah.
really want to help someone and support them, sometimes it's just about listening. And then again, coming back as a friend of how can I support you? Do you want me to look, right? I'm happy to do that. If you just don't have, the wherewithal, the
Yeah.
bandwidth. I would have loved that, when I when I was going through a situation at work, and it was very difficult. It was made more difficult by the process that I had to go through in
Yeah.
order to get the support that I needed at a very difficult time.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have someone that you trust and that's going to help you through that process, just through support.
Yeah. So I think that there's a couple of themes that I would like to highlight right here. So first off, respect privacy. That's incredibly important that you respect privacy. And if somebody does disclose to you, that you make sure that you respect it. It's their story to tell, their lived experience. Even if you've noticed them struggling, if they disclose to you, privacy. It's important to ask people how they want to be interacted with and to offer help, but also to do it the same way you would to anybody else. And the way that I think about it is that I'd offer to hold the door open for anybody else. Why wouldn't I offer the same thing to an individual that is in a wheelchair? The wheelchair is almost irrelevant at that point. But I think that the third thing that I would highlight is that seek out to include people and don't make assumptions. So often we are assuming that people might turn us down. They might not choose to go with us to various different events, but respond to them and treat them the same as you would any other person, regardless of their disability, because that's really what so much of us are looking for. We're not looking for special treatment. We're not looking for difference within the workplace. We are looking to strictly be included because, as I mentioned at the beginning, right, Miles is many things. Miles is also a person with a disability, but it can list off 12 other things that I am well before I am a person with a disability. Before we go, I did want to give sorry, go ahead.
I have one thing though. There is a caveat to to what we were just talking about as far as privacy. And that is if someone is in danger of hurting themselves or hurting someone else, then it really does become your responsibility to find the resource, seek that out, and really provide whatever support is needed. You could go to NAMI, you can go to wherever, you can call the suicide hotline. There are things that you absolutely can do if someone is going to harm themselves or you feel like they could harm someone else.
Thank you for that shout out there. Yeah, that is important. I did want to give a shout out to, we had so many people that joined into the chat right here, and me and Felicia will be going afterwards to respond to some of these individual comments. So thank you for your engagement. Thank you, Matthew. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It is AISETOU, but thank you for your comment as well. Jody chimed in as well as Anu, again, I don't know how to pronounce it, ANOU. I'll just kind of display it on the screen right here. But thank you for your comment. And I think that this one really kind of spoke to it. I wish I got a chance to meet people like you. As a disabled person, it's so comforting listening and seeing to people like you. Thank you. So thank you very much for your comment. It's good to see you and appreciate you chiming in today. So as we're wrapping up, Felicia, please tell me a little bit more about how people can get engaged with you, where they can follow some of your work.
Sure. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. I do post a lot there. Recently, I do have a lot of opinions. opinions. And I love people with opinions. So, yes, and they are opinions grounded in factual information. But yes, I do have a lot of that. Also, you can go to my website, inclusionwithoutillusionllc.com. And you could DM me if you want. You don't have to just follow me. If you have questions or, you would like to explore, other options as far as disability inclusion is concerned, I'm always happy to work with people. And you don't need to be an organization. I have helped. If individuals come to me and they have questions, I'm always happy to try to answer them and at least set them on the right path.
Yeah.
Right. I may not always be the best person to really provide the information that they need, but chances are I probably know where they need to go.
Fair enough. And as far as organizations that want to interface with you, tell me a little bit more about the services that you offer them.
Yes. So Inclusion Without Illusion, all about, again, supporting business and employers. One of the things that I did last year and coming into this year was I did develop an accommodation management system that is role-based. So again, thinking about employees who have had a really difficult time throughout the accommodation process. It's learning for them, right? They do not have to actually log in. There is a space there where all employees can go in and learn more about disability, learn more about accommodations. But once they actually log in and they ask for an accommodation, they see where that accommodation is throughout the process. Transparency is key, because if you don't know where it is, then chances are it's probably not really going anywhere. And it does actually reduce the time for the accommodation to either be reviewed, approved, et cetera, by more than 2 weeks, because some are taking as long as 30 days or longer. What's also included in that is a manager portal, HR portal, and a legal portal. HR and managers also have access to training and coaching in the moment. So if they have a question, rather than having to get out and go into another learning management system, which, by the way, probably doesn't have the information that they need, or having to go out. I'm sorry, I am such a cynic and I don't mean to. I'm hitting the no fun button a lot here. But it really does allow them to ask questions in the moment. It is AI powered, but it is gated so that the AI can only go to resources that I allow it to go to, which are reputable, Jan, et cetera. Also, training, any kind of training, education. I am currently working on asynchronous models that will be 5 to 7 minutes as opposed to an hour-long training, but I do still do those hour-long training and speaking. And then if you have speaking requirements, I'll be speaking next week for a company, Vituity, just talking about disability and caregivers. How understanding both really can help us in the workplace, because we face the same challenges from a disclosure standpoint. A lot of us that are caregivers do not want to say that we're caregivers because there can be repercussions to that as well.
Such an interesting topic. And by the way, I do want to give a shout out to, this is a weekly segment. Please join me at 11:30 Central Standard Time on a weekly basis on Fridays. Next week, we are going to be talking with Laura Paget. She's with a friend over from the UK that I have. And we're going to be talking about sunflowers and hidden disabilities. You may have seen it in the airports where people are wearing the lanyards that has the sunflower. What's up with that? What is that? So we're going to be talking a little bit more with Laura about that, but hope that you can join us. Felicia, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And thanks to everybody that chimed in. Again, we will drop all links to all the resources as well as Felicia's website into the comments afterwards. And please tune in next week. Looking forward to seeing you then.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye for now.